first time my son warned me, he didn't cry or explain. He just held my hand and asked if we could leave early, like he already knew something I didn't. I told myself children sense moods, not danger. I didn't realize he was trying to save us both. We lived in a quiet place where mornings came softly and nothing ever seemed urgent. I was a mother trying to keep peace between routine and love, between what felt normal and what felt off. My husband had always been steady, familiar, until my son's small warnings began to disturb the silence we had learned to trust. The kettle hadn't started to sing yet, but the house already felt awake, not lively, just alert. Morning light slid across the kitchen floor in thin, pale stripes. Dust floated through it, slow and patient, like it had nowhere else to be. I stood at the counter with my hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't filled yet, listening to the quiet do its work. That was when my son reached for my hand. He didn't look up at me. He just held on, tight enough that I felt it in my wrist. "Can we keep the door open today?" he asked. His voice wasn't scared. It was careful. I smiled the way mothers do when they don't want to make a thing of something. "Which door, sweetheart?" "All of them," he said. "Just not closed." I told him yes. Of course I did. I told myself children ask for strange things all the time. The kettle finally whistled. Too loud. I turned it off quickly, as if noise might upset the balance of the room. My son climbed onto his chair and watched the hallway instead of the table. His feet didn't swing like they usually did. At breakfast, he ate slowly. Each bite looked like a decision. When I asked if he wanted more toast, he shook his head and asked if we could sit closer together. So I pulled my chair nearer to his, our elbows touching. He relaxed just a little then, like something inside him had loosened. I noticed the clock. It was always the clock. He'd started watching it in the evenings too. Not obsessively, just enough that I began to notice him noticing. When the minute hand moved past a certain point, his shoulders would rise. He'd scoot closer to me on the couch. Sometimes he'd ask to go outside. Sometimes he'd ask nothing at all. "Why don't you want to stay?" I asked him once, gently, while tying his shoes. He shrugged. "I just don't like when it gets quiet." I laughed. "Quiet's good. Quiet means nothing's wrong." He didn't argue. He just nodded, the way children do when they don't feel understood but don't know how to explain it. That evening, my husband came home at the same time he always did. The sound of his car in the driveway still carried the same rhythm. Gravel crunching. Engine off. Door closing. Normal. But the house changed. Not dramatically. No slammed doors. No raised voices. Just a subtle tightening, fabric pulled too far. The air grew still. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum more softly, as if it were listening. My husband kissed my cheek. His lips were warm. Familiar. He smiled at our son. "Hey, champ." Our son nodded but didn't smile back. At dinner, he asked if we could leave early. We weren't going anywhere, but he said it anyway. My husband chuckled and ruffled his hair. "Leave where?" "Just early," my son said. I reached for his hand under the table. His fingers wrapped around mine immediately. They were cold. "Eat," my husband said kindly. "Your mom worked hard on this." The fork scraped the plate. Too loud again. I felt silly for noticing, but once I did, I couldn't stop. Sounds at edges now. Chairs moving. The ticking clock. The way my husband's voice filled the room while my son stayed small. After dinner, my son followed me from room to room like a shadow. When I folded laundry, he sat on the floor beside the basket. When I wiped the counter, he leaned against my leg. Every time my husband passed through the house, my son went still. Later, as I tucked him into bed, he asked if I'd stay until he fell asleep. "I always do," I said. "Yes," he said softly. "But stay." So I sat. The lamp cast a warm circle on the wall. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing the windows with a sound like breath. My son stared at the ceiling. "Mom," he whispered. "Yes, Dad's different sometimes." I waited. Silence teaches you more than words if you let it. "He doesn't do anything," my son added quickly. "He just feels different." I told myself not to panic. Children feel moods. They absorb tension like sponges. I told myself that families carry weight the way houses do. Quietly, without meaning to. "Everyone feels different sometimes," I said. "That doesn't mean something's wrong." He turned onto his side and pulled the blanket to his chin. "Okay," but his hand found mine again, tighter than before. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle. The familiar creaks and sighs felt altered, as if they carried messages I didn't yet know how to read. My husband slept beside me, breathing evenly, peacefully. I told myself I was imagining things. That motherhood rewires your nerves. That worry looks for places to land. Still, when morning came, I left the doors open. All of them. And when my son reached for my hand again, at the same hour, with the same quiet urgency, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not yet. Just the beginning of listening. The first sound I noticed was the chair. Not moving, just being there. It sat at the kitchen table before the sun came up, pulled slightly away like someone had stood from it and forgotten to push it back in. The light over the sink was still off. Outside, the sky was the color of unwashed linen. My son was already awake. He sat in that chair with his hands folded in front of him, feet tucked beneath the rung, staring at nothing in particular. Not the window, not the clock,
honey?
just the space where the room seemed to thin. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched him breathe. "Why are you up so early?" I asked softly. He didn't jump, didn't turn. "Just waiting," he said. "For what?" He shrugged. A small movement. Practiced. It goes away faster if I'm quiet. I didn't ask what it was. Some questions feel too heavy to lift all at once. The house was different at that hour.
And then
It always
the
had been,
fish just
but now it
jumped
felt
right
intentional.
out of the
Every
water.
sound stood out.
Biggest one I've
The
seen
hum of the
all
refrigerator,
week.
the tick of the clock, the way the pipes whispered behind the walls like
It's
they were
okay,
passing
try a
notes to
little
each
more,
other.
baby.
I poured coffee and watched the steam rise and disappear. My son followed it with his eyes until it vanished. When my husband came into the kitchen later, he smiled like he always did. Kissed my temple. Ruffled our son's hair. "Up early, champ," he said. Our son nodded, but his eyes stayed on the table. Nothing happened, and yet something had. After that morning, patterns began to settle into place like furniture you don't remember moving. There were rooms my son no longer entered. The spare bedroom, the back hallway, the laundry room after sunset. He would stop short of their doorways and wait for me, hands clasped behind his back, pretending to be interested in the floor. "Why don't you grab your shoes?" I'd ask. "I'll wait," he'd say. "You first." At night, he heard footsteps before I did. I'd be folding clothes or rinsing a plate when he'd pause, head tilted, listening. His body would still, like an animal sensing weather. "He's coming," he'd say quietly. And moments later, my husband would appear in the doorway. I told myself children are observant, that they learn rhythms adults ignore. That coincidence builds stories when you're already tired. Still, I began to notice how the air changed when my husband entered a room. Not sharply, not dramatically, just a subtle cooling, like the sun had slipped behind a cloud without warning anyone. He remained gentle, ordinary, the man I married. That's what made it harder. There was a door in the house that stayed closed now. It hadn't always. The door to the basement used to be propped open with an old book. Now it was shut, handle turned just enough to suggest intention. When I asked about it, my husband said he was reorganizing. Needed privacy. Dust everywhere. "That's fine," I said. But my son walked past it like it might speak. He'd lower his voice, quickened his steps. Sometimes he'd reach for my sleeve until we were well past it, then let go without a word. One afternoon, I asked him why he didn't like that door. "I didn't say I didn't like it," he
Look.
replied. "But you don't go near it." He considered
I
that.
can't discuss
"I just don't think it
this
wants to
right
be open
now.
right now." That night, he climbed into our
I'll
bed
call
without
you
asking.
back when I'm alone.
Pressed his back against my chest and stayed there, awake, until my breathing slowed. My husband slept through it all. Morning came again,
Why
pale
is
and
it
quiet.
you don't want to
Dust
stay?
in the hallway caught the light and hung there, unmoving, like the house itself was holding still. I stood barefoot on the wood floor, feeling the faint chill
Yes,
rise through my
I
soles,
heard
and
you.
listened. Nothing moved,
Just make
and yet
sure
my chest
it's
felt
handled
tight.
quietly.
I realized then that
don't
the
want
house had started
anyone
listening
else
before I
involved
did.
in this.
It knew when to be silent, when to creak, when to breathe. My son began setting his backpack by the door hours before school. Shoes lined up neatly, jacket folded, always ready to leave. "Where are you rushing to?" I asked once, trying to smile. "Outside," he said. "It's louder out there." One evening, while my husband showered, I asked my son what he meant. He looked at me carefully, not like a child asking permission, but like someone measuring the weight of a truth. "It's quieter when he's not in the room," he said. "But it's not empty." The shower shut off upstairs. Water ran through the pipes.
It goes
I nodded,
away
as if that explained
faster
everything.
if
Later,
I'm
alone in the
quiet.
hallway, I placed my hand against the wall near the basement door. The paint was cool, solid, familiar. I told myself walls don't listen. Houses don't hold their breath. Children don't sense danger where there is none. But that night, when I lay awake beside my husband, listening to his even breathing, I felt the space between the walls tighten. Not closing, waiting. And for the first time, I wondered, not what my son was sensing, but what I had been choosing not to hear. The afternoon light had shifted without me noticing, that IT always did. One moment the kitchen was bright enough to forgive dust, and the next it wasn't. Shadows stretched longer than they should have, settling into corners like they planned to stay. I stood at the sink rinsing a cup that was already clean, listening to the water run longer than necessary. The house was empty except for us. My son sat at the table with a pencil he wasn't using, tracing the same shape over and over on scrap paper. Not drawing, just circling. His eyes lifted every few seconds to check where I was, then returned to the page when he saw I hadn't moved. That was when I noticed it. Something small. So small it could have passed for nothing at all. The dish towel. I always folded it over the oven handle. Always. It was one of those habits you don't think about because it feels like gravity, unchanging, reliable. But that afternoon, it was tucked into a drawer. Neatly. Intentionally. I stood there longer than necessary, my hands still wet, staring at the empty handle. "Did you put this away?" I asked my son, holding the towel. He shook his head before I finished speaking. "No." His voice didn't waver. No defensiveness. Just certainty. I nodded, as if that answered everything, and put the towel back where it belonged. But my chest tightened anyway, a quiet pressure that had nowhere to go. I told myself it meant nothing. People change routines all the time. Houses adapt. Objects move. But the thought followed me as I walked down the hall, brushing against me like a sleeve. In the living room, the lamp was off. I was sure I'd left it on. The room felt smaller than it used to, the ceiling lower, the walls closer together. The air pressed against my skin, warm but not comforting. I crossed the room and turned the lamp back on. Light returned, but the feeling didn't leave. My son watched all of this. Not openly, not anxiously. He watched the way someone does when they're waiting to see if you'll notice the same thing they did. Later, while he played quietly on the floor, I opened the hall closet to grab a blanket. A pair of shoes sat inside that hadn't been there that morning. Clean. Laced. Facing outward. Not wrong, just deliberate. I closed the door slowly, as if speed might disturb whatever order had been set. The house was still. No creaks. No settling. Even the clock seemed to tick softer, like it was aware of itself. That night, after my husband came home and moved through the rooms with his usual ease, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before. Not suspicion, at least not yet. Just attention. He hung his jacket in a different place. He rinsed his plate and dried it instead of leaving it in the rack. He closed the basement door behind him, carefully, until the latch clicked. "Organizing again?" I asked lightly. He smiled. "Trying to." He kissed my cheek. His lips were warm. Familiar. His smile reached his mouth but stopped short of his eyes. I told myself I was reading into things. That motherhood sharpens your focus until everything feels like a signal. That a life built on routines eventually invites disruption. Still, when my son came to sit beside me on the couch, he leaned in closer than usual. His head rested against my arm. His fingers picked at the seam of my sleeve, slow and repetitive. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "I think so. Think so." Later, after he was asleep, I stood alone in the kitchen retracing my steps. Morning. Afternoon. Evening. I replayed small moments I'd brushed past without stopping. The way my son paused before entering certain rooms, the way he went quiet at the sound of footsteps, the way he always asked me to walk in front of him now. I remembered the first time he'd asked if we could leave early. The way he said it like a weather report. I opened drawers that didn't need opening. Checked shelves that hadn't changed. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. Normal can hide a lot if you let it. In the hallway, the light flickered once, then steadied. Dust hung in the air again, glowing faintly. I reached out and brushed my fingers through it, watching the particles scatter and resettle. Carefully hidden. That phrase came to me without invitation. Carefully hidden doesn't always mean dangerous. Sometimes it just means intentional. Thought through. Designed to go unnoticed. My son had started watching me the way I watched the house. Quietly. Measuring. Waiting. The next morning, he sat at the table again before dawn. Same chair. Same posture. Same folded hands. I poured coffee and joined him. Did you sleep? I asked. A little, he said. He looked up at me then, not pleading, not afraid. Just searching. You see it now, he asked. My throat tightened. See what? He hesitated, then shook his head. Never mind. But the question stayed with me long after he left for school. It followed me through the quiet hours, through the hum of appliances, through the soft thud of the mail hitting the floor. I stood in the hallway again that afternoon, staring at the closed basement door. My hand hovered near the knob, not touching it. I didn't open it. Instead, I listened. Not for sound, but for absence. For the way the house held itself together, piece by piece, as if aware that being seen was no longer optional. That evening, when my husband's car pulled into the driveway, my son reached for my hand without looking at me. His grip was firmer this time. Not asking, telling. And for the first time, I understood that whatever I'd found wasn't the discovery. It was the invitation. The house wasn't hiding from me anymore. It was waiting to see if I was ready to stop looking away. The truth didn't knock, it didn't call my name. It arrived the way dust does, through a thin place I hadn't sealed, settling quietly where I thought nothing could reach. I was standing in the hallway when it happened, the late afternoon light leaning against the walls like it needed rest. The house was quiet in that careful way it had learned, every sound trimmed of excess. I remember the smell of soap on my hands, the faint warmth of the floor through my socks, the hum of something mechanical somewhere behind the walls. Voices came from the kitchen. Not raised, not secretive, just low enough to be assumed safe. My husband stood at the counter, his back to me, speaking into the phone. I recognized the tone before the words reached me. Not work, not casual, something measured. The kind of voice you use when you believe you're in control of the room. I didn't mean to listen, I didn't move either. He said my name once, then our son's. He didn't say anything unkind. That's what startled me. No sharp edges. No anger. Just an ease that didn't belong where it was. I've got it handled, he said. It's fine. A pause. No, she doesn't notice. She never does. The sentence landed without sound. He turned then and saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house waited. He smiled. The same smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Familiar. Comfortable. You're home early, he said. I nodded. My mouth felt dry. So are you. He ended the call without hurry. Set the phone down like it was any other object. A cup. A spoon. Something harmless. What was that about? I asked. Nothing, he said easily. Just sorting things out. Sorting. The word stayed with me as he moved past, brushing my shoulder, his touch light and brief. I watched him leave the room, and for the first time, I didn't follow. I stood there and listened to the silence close behind him. Later, while my son did his homework at the table, I watched him from the sink. His pencil moved carefully. Too carefully. Every line deliberate, as if mistakes weren't allowed anymore. You can erase, I said softly. He looked up. I know. He didn't erase. I saw then how much effort it took for him to stay small. To stay quiet. To break his thoughts into pieces that wouldn't alarm me. How long? I asked, my voice barely there. He understood the question. A while, he said. The room felt suddenly honest. Smaller, but honest. The ceiling didn't press anymore. The walls didn't lean in. They stood where they were meant to. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He hesitated. Then said, I did. The truth of that settled slowly. Every moment replayed itself with new weight. The open doors. The early mornings. The way he watched the clock. The grip of his hand in mine. Not warnings, invitations. That night, my husband moved through the house with the same quiet assurance he always had. But I saw it now, the way his calm was arranged, rehearsed, built to disarm. He didn't look at me when he spoke. Not fully. You seem tired, he said. I am, I replied. He nodded, as if that explained everything. When he went to bed, I stayed in the living room with the lights low. The house felt different. Not relieved. Released. Like it had been holding a breath it no longer needed to keep. I walked through the rooms one by one. Not searching. Just seeing. The spare bedroom. The hallway. The closed door at the end of the stairs. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. Understanding has its own weight. It rearranges things without permission. Back in my son's room, he slept curled toward the wall, one hand tucked beneath his chin. His breathing was even. Unforced. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders weren't raised. I sat beside him and brushed my fingers through his hair. He didn't stir. I'm here, I whispered. The words felt late. Necessary. Fragile. In the kitchen, the clock ticked without apology. The refrigerator hummed at its usual pitch. The house returned to its ordinary sounds, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The illusion had ended, and the silence that replaced it wasn't empty. It was clear. It held shape. Meaning. I understood now why my son spoke in fragments. Why he chose quiet over explanation. He wasn't hiding anything. He was carrying it. I had taught him to be patient, to be polite, to trust the calm of adults who knew what they were doing. I had mistaken peace for safety, routine for truth. That night, when my husband turned toward me in bed, I didn't pretend to sleep. I didn't turn away either. I lay there, listening to his breathing, measuring it against my own. The house didn't listen anymore. It waited. And in that waiting, I felt something settle into place. Not fear, not resolve, but a readiness I hadn't known how to name before. Whatever came next would not arrive quietly, but it would not arrive unseen. And my son would not have to carry it alone again. The morning arrived without ceremony. No birds. No breeze. Just a pale light easing itself through the curtains like it didn't want to be noticed. I stood at the sink, rinsing a single cup, watching the water bead and slip away. The house felt lighter but not empty. Like a room after furniture has been moved, familiar, yet finally honest. I listened for footsteps that didn't come. The clock ticked once, then again, each sound clear and unafraid. My son was awake already. He sat on the floor with his back against the couch, knees pulled in, tracing the grain of the wood with one finger. When he looked up at me, his eyes were steady. Not brave. Not scared. Just present. Breakfast? I asked. He nodded. Okay. The word carried less weight than it had in weeks. As I cracked eggs into the pan, the last piece settled into place, not with a jolt, but with a quiet certainty that felt older than thought. The phone call. The careful calm. The closed doors. The way my son had learned to speak in pieces because whole sentences were too loud for the house we lived in. Listening isn't the same as hearing. I had heard everything. I had believed nothing. When my husband came into the kitchen, he moved slower than usual. His smile appeared on schedule. His eyes did not. Morning, he said. Morning, I replied. The pan hissed softly. Butter melted. The room held us in its light. We ate without talking. Forks moved. Chairs shifted. My son finished quickly and slid off his seat, pausing by the doorway like he always did, then stopping himself. He stayed. I'm going to get dressed, he said, and waited. For what? My husband asked. For school, my son answered evenly. He looked at me then, just once. A question without words. I nodded. After he left the room, the quiet rearranged itself. I know, I said. My husband looked up. Know what? Enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I named things the way you name weather, clearly without apology. Patterns. Choices. Words spoken where I could hear them. Silences built on purpose. His jaw tightened, then loosened. You're imagining things, he said. You always do this. No, I replied. I didn't do this. I stopped doing it. He smiled, but not with his eyes. You're overreacting. I set my fork down. The sound was small. Final. We're leaving, I said. The word we mattered. He laughed once, sharp and brief. You can't just. I can, I said. And I am. The house didn't hold its breath. It exhaled. My son returned with his backpack on, standing straighter than I'd seen him in months. He didn't look at his father. He looked at me. I took his hand. Ready? I asked. He nodded. As we stepped outside, the morning air felt different on my skin, cooler, cleaner. The sun had lifted just enough to touch the tops of the trees. Somewhere down the street, a door closed. Somewhere else, a car started. Ordinary sounds. Honest ones. In the car, my son buckled himself in without rushing. His shoulders lowered. Not all the way. Enough. You okay? I asked. He considered that. I think so. We drove without music. The road unspooled ahead of us, quiet and unremarkable. I watched the reflection of his face in the rearview mirror, softer now, like something had been set down. I'm sorry, I said. For what? He asked. For asking you to be patient when I should have been brave. He didn't answer right away. Then, you listen now. Listening now. The words stayed with me as the house receded in the mirror, smaller with every turn. I thought of the doors I'd kept open too late. The questions I'd asked softly, so I wouldn't have to hear the answers. The way children learn what adults model, even when we think we're hiding it. Belief comes before proof. Safety before certainty. That afternoon, in a new place with unfamiliar light, my son sat at a different table and did his homework without watching the clock. I made tea and let it steep until it was too strong, then added water. The cup warmed my hands. The floor creaked once, like it remembered. Then it settled. When evening came, we ate dinner with the windows open. Night sounds drifted in. Distant laughter, a dog barking, the low hum of traffic. Nothing pressed in. Nothing waited. My son leaned back in his chair and yawned. A real yawn. Unhidden. "Can we leave the lights on?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "As long as you want." Later, as he slept, I sat beside the bed and watched his breathing even out. His hand rested open on the blanket, fingers loose. I placed my palm over his, feeling the quiet truth of it. "I should have listened," I whispered, not as regret, but as a promise. The house we were in didn't listen. It simply stood there, holding us. Outside, the moon climbed. Inside, the silence felt like space instead of weight. And in that space, I imagined a future built not on what I could prove, but on what I chose to believe when belief mattered most. If I had trusted him sooner, the past would look different. But the future still could. I turned off the lamp and let the room darken gently. Tomorrow would come. This time, we would be ready to meet it,